Hi, and welcome to Sergeant Parsons' channel. I'm your host, Sergeant Parsons. In this episode, I'm going to discuss basic firearm safety. I'm a firm believer and hard defender of the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. However, as with all of our freedoms, it comes with its own set of responsibilities. And remember, it's not a gun, it's a firearm or a weapon. It is a tool of destruction and should be afforded that level of respect. The first and foremost of these is applying basic firearm safety fundamentals at all times. As the coronavirus pandemic became real to more Americans, and I saw people starting to needlessly panic, I went to purchase some additional ammo at the local gun store. Some of the things that I overheard were absolutely mind-blowing. Clerks were trying to sell shotguns to first-time gun buyers to defend a home with children in it. I heard questions phrased like, "What size bullets does this take?" At what point a customer came back in angry at the store clerk because he had sold him the wrong ammo. But the customer had asked for 38. He received 38, but apparently his weapon was a 380, which is not the same thing. I have also heard many previously anti-gun celebrities are now purchasing their own firearms for protection. In the rush that people are in to gather these supplies, there wasn't much time spent on learning on the basics of handling a firearm when you feel like you have to get it now or you're not going to get it at all. You have a responsibility to educate yourself on how to use the firearm safely and properly. You owe it to society, the same society that gives you the freedom to purchase it without that knowledge. Educating yourself about a firearm, and about your firearm specifically, will increase your chances of survivability when it comes time to deploy the weapon. You need to know how the weapon operates so that you can manage malfunctions such as hang fires and failures to feed, fire, or eject. Some other aspects of operation that you need to look into, and it's usually included in your user's manual or your owner's manual. Is it gas operated? Is it recoil operated? Does it fire from the open or closed bolt position? Is it double or single action? Is it a semi-automatic? What kind of magazine system does it have? And what size ammunition does it take? Specificity counts in this area. Before we begin, go ahead and go take a few minutes to look up some videos and to read the user's manual on your firearm if you just purchased it. It will include things such as how to take it down, what the field stripping procedures are, and how to clear the weapon. So, while you do that, I'm going to go over here and work out a little bit. Once you have watched a video or two specific to your firearm and read through the owner's manual, and you have a basic understanding of the firearm, we're ready to move on to the next most important step, which is to always treat your firearm as if it's loaded. Now, if you have a good manual from a reliable manufacturer, it probably stated that multiple times, but just in case you didn't read the manual, I'm going to say it here. Always treat the firearm as if it's loaded. If it's always in your head that it's loaded, then the rest of these safety guidelines will be much easier to adhere to, as they are essentially common sense to handling a loaded firearm. Next, always pay attention to your trigger finger. Keep your booger picker off the bang switch. Never put your finger inside of the trigger well or on the trigger assembly until you've drawn down on your target and are ready to apply pressure to the trigger. Some triggers are much lighter than others, and they can be fired with very little pressure. If this is the first time for you owning a firearm, let's do a little exercise. This is the finger pointing exercise. Now, in the military, we don't like to point apparently because it hurts people's feelings. I don't know. Instead, we use the knife hand, but in this case, we're actually going to be pointing because people can point at essentially anything and you almost know exactly what you're pointing at. It's a peculiar spatial awareness thing that we have. So if I point at something, I know almost exactly what I'm pointing at. My body just knows. So that's what we'll practice. First, we're going to pretend like we're holding a firearm. So you can see this is where my magazine well will sit. And we want to have it loose. We don't want to squeeze the handle. Squeezing the handle is bad marksmanship, and that's going to be for another video. Then we're going to take our trigger finger and make sure that we pretend to have it along the outside body of the firearm. So now when we turn over, we're pointing. So let's try that. We're going to take our trigger finger. We're going to be holding our pretend firearm, and we're just going to point at whatever we want. Practice this a few times and get used to handling it with your finger outstretched along the body of the weapon. This way you don't have any accidents. This is also how we're going to draw the weapon, bring it to bear, and then we'll place our finger into the trigger well when we're ready to fire. So I draw, my finger's still pointed, I'm pointing, and then when I'm ready, I put it inside of the trigger well and we can pull straight back. But that's marksmanship for another video. Now, let's discuss muzzle awareness. Assuming that the weapon is always loaded, we always want to make sure that the muzzle is oriented in a safe direction, away from structures, pets, and other people. Using our trigger awareness skills, let's practice some muzzle awareness by holding your invisible pistol and maintaining muzzle awareness while moving your arms around. Pick something or several things in the room to avoid pointing at. Then, avoid pointing at them while moving around. This is good tactical practice as well. You can move around things, over things, or just switch targets. This is very good practice. As long as you keep your finger straight, you're not inside the trigger well, and your weapon will not fire if your finger's not on the trigger. Now we'll actually get into handling the weapon. The first thing you do when you receive a weapon, either by picking it up or having it handed to you, it's important to obtain muzzle awareness before you even grab the weapon. Which way is it oriented? Keeping it pointed in a safe direction will secure the firearm in a safe manner, keeping our fingers out of the trigger well and keeping the firearm pointed in a safe direction. A safe direction is generally either downrange, where the targets are at, or in a sharp or up or down angle, depending on the environment. Now we're going to clear the weapon of magazines and ammunition to ensure that it's safe to handle. Every firearm is different, which is why you need to have studied your firearm at this point. I'll go over two common types, specifically a revolver and a semi-automatic with a detachable magazine. Clearing the magazine and the chamber of rounds is essential to rendering the firearm safe for transfer, storage, or maintenance. Thank you, Private. Now do work. Always show gratitude. Revolvers are fairly simple. Here, I'm going to use this Smith & Wesson Special Cartridge 38. It fires a 38 special cartridge. It's your run-of-the-mill, double-action Smith & Wesson revolver. This was actually my great-grandfather's. We'll start by securing the weapon with our finger outside of the trigger well. On this side, we see that there is a lever. We push it, and the crane and cylinder come out of the side of the firearm. We see on the other side of the crane, in the center of the cylinder, this is our ejector pin. And what we'll do is we'll push that ejector pin out and turn the firearm backwards. You may have to spin the cylinder a little bit, or even manually pull out some of the rounds. We can then inspect the cylinders to ensure that the cylinders are empty. We close the firearm, and our weapon is now safe. For removable magazines, I'll be demonstrating with this Sig Sauer P290 Restrike. This is a semi-automatic, detachable magazine-fed, short recoil-operated, double-action-only pistol. Because it has a detachable magazine, I know that I need to remove the magazine before cycling the weapon. To remove the magazine on this, I'm going to press the magazine release, remove the magazine, and set it to the side. Now, I need to cycle the weapon to ensure that if there are any rounds in the chamber ready to be fired, that they are ejected. If we don't remove the magazine before this step, we'll just pull the next round right into the chamber, making the firearm active. If possible, we want to lock the slide or bolt to the open position. We can see it ejected around. I use my slide lock here to ensure that the slide stays back and the bolt is open. I visually inspect the chamber. I make sure that I don't see any rounds in there. You'll be able to see the cap. And I want to check down in the magazine well to make sure that there are no spent cartridges or live ammunition in the magazine well. Once I have verified that all the ammunition is removed from the firearm, I can return the slide to the closed position and my firearm is now safe. Now that you know how to properly receive and clear a firearm, you should become very familiar with this process. You may end up using it for the clearing process for more than just maintenance and leaving the range. In some places, I've even seen stores where there are clearing barrels outside and they require you to clear your weapon of ammunition before entering the store. Don't be that guy that blasts one off at the clearing barrel. You will be mocked and you will be ridiculed. Properly maintaining your firearm is essential to its operation when it's needed. Whether you fire it or not, it still needs to be regularly maintained, which means you need to learn how to field strip it, clean it, and replace a light coat of oil over the moving parts to keep it lubricated and to keep it from oxidizing. Every firearm's field stripping procedures are different, and depending on the weapon type and manufacturer, sometimes similar weapons can be vastly different. For this demonstration, I'm going to move forward with the Sig Sauer P290 Restrike that we just cleared a few moments ago. I'm not going to walk you through the breakdown, but here you can see that I have my firearm field stripped. Here's the lower assembly. We have the barrel, the slide, the guide rod and return spring. We have our magazine, and we have our retention spring. Also, I have some cleaning cloths that are coated with CLP. CLP stands for Cleaner Lubricant Protectant. So it can be used to clean out all of the carbon buildup that is inside your firearm. It'll lubricate it so that way all the moving parts are moving as freely as possible, and it will protect it from oxidation, which means rust. So once it's taken apart, we're going to go ahead and start cleaning all of the parts of the firearm until our cleaning cloths come back relatively clean. Next, we're going to take a dry cloth and wipe everything down to make sure that it's actually all the way clean, and then we pull off as much carbon from the firearm as we can. Now, I want to take my oilcloth that's still clean, and I want to lightly lube all the moving parts of the firearm. We don't want to put too much on there. Too much is going to collect a lot of dirt, a lot of dust, and it's going to end up rendering your firearm inoperable. So let's just make sure that all the moving parts have a little bit of oil on it. A little tiny coat, super thin. We just want a thin coat. And now we'll reassemble the weapon and ensure that it cycles around properly. And we have a functioning weapon. There are all kinds of debates on how to properly store a firearm, but there are some things you should never do. Never put it somewhere that is really dirty. No garages or wood shops. Don't store it under your bed without a case. Never leave it in places with high humidity. It will oxidize, it will rust, and it will seize. So you can't keep them in the bathroom. Don't keep them in your garage outside. You never want to store them in a location that can be accessed by a minor that has not been properly trained or licensed to use the firearm. In fact, you probably never want to store it in a location where anybody who has not been properly trained or licensed on the firearm can gain access to it. And in some states, there are actually laws against leaving a firearm where a child can access it. The rest is generally based on your situation. If you have children who you don't want having access to it, then you may take one approach, such as a vault or a lockbox, while someone without children may take another by just simply setting it on their nightstand. Whichever, I do highly advise against the approach of keeping ammunition separate from the firearm. If you need it, you probably don't have time for an Easter egg hunt. In closing, I highly encourage every American who has the right to bear arms to educate themselves on firearm safety and to become very familiar with your firearms specifically, especially if you are new to firearms. There are a lot of things to know, especially when it comes to using it, but that's a whole nother set of videos. This video is just an introduction to the proper handling of a firearm, not necessarily its use. Stay tuned and I'll have more on that. Thank you for watching Sergeant Parsons' channel, and I hope you found this insightful, helpful, or that you can share it with someone who you know might find it helpful or useful, or is a first-time gun owner. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share. And thank you.